So thank you for so many people for joining my session. It's been a long time since I've seen so many people in a room. So today we're going to be talking about Kubernetes Edge. So I don't know if it's me or the topic that is not that interesting. I mean, Edge is quite a common use case those days, especially in our world with, like IoT, everything is connected. There's more and more traction around Edge, especially around, like we are accumulating a lot of data, like individually. So running compute power very close to our data, we're going to see why. I mean, make a lot of sense. So I think, yeah, it's quite key nowadays. And the talk is going to be about Kairos, which is an open source project that does multiple things. Amongst them is helping run Kubernetes at the edge, but also it's more than that. It's an edge factory and meta distribution, and we're going to kind of double click on that to explain what is a meta distribution. So quick words on myself. My name is Nick. I've been spending probably about 6-7 years working on Kubernetes, mainly engineering, technical marketing, product management, DevRel. I mean, everything is kind of the same thing nowadays. I'm a jack of all trades. I'm heading the DevRel team at Spectro Cloud. I've been there for about 1 year. Before that, I went a few startups. Before that, I was at Cisco for about 6-7 years. So my background is essentially developer background as well as infra networking. I mean, I've been in this industry for quite a long time. I'm 43 now. Actually, last week I just turned 43. I don't look like, but I'm that old. No, I'm just joking. Okay, so the immutable edge factory. So first of all, let's define a little bit what edge is. So edge is essentially a location, but also a way to process data and run application closer to where they are actually being used or created, rather than sending all the data to a central data center that is far away. And there are multiple benefits of doing so for multiple reasons. First one is cost efficiency. If you want to send all your data to a public cloud, you're going to be charged on ingress for sure, so it's going to cost you a lot of money. And also you may want to process some of the data, running sort of computing the data with machine learning processes. You want to filter the data, make it ready, and remove the noise, reduce the footprint essentially. And also sending the data over long distance may not be that efficient, especially given the amount of data you may have to generate with IoT and all those kind of things. So a couple of use cases for Edge. We have, of course, IoT, data localization, privacy is another one. Smart cities with real-time analytics, all those kind of things. Network functions. For service provider is another one. In our day-to-day life, I would say if you go to a retail company, maybe McDonald's, or other like food industries, some factories. I mean, of course, the more data we add, the more we need to process, and the more efficient it will be to do that at the edge. So the question now becomes, what do you run at the edge, and what are the different type of form factors? So actually, Kubernetes is I would say it's an ideal candidate for multiple reasons. First would be the resource efficiency. Kubernetes as a whole, I mean, it's a global platform. It can run your application as a package. So the idea would be to package your application not as container, but as a Kubernetes cluster. Right. So my application equal a Kubernetes cluster. I'm going to deploy at the edge. That's the right way to do it, because we inherit all the features and qualities from Kubernetes, which includes scalability, high availability, automation, upgrades, very easy upgrades, and of course repeatability. So it makes sense to use Kubernetes at the edge. However, the difficulty with Kubernetes, so who already has deployed Kubernetes somewhere in the cloud or locally? Yeah, a couple of you. That's good. So you probably noticed that deploying the same Kubernetes environment with exactly the same operating system, the same packages, keeping track of that on every cluster is quite hard. So, but what you don't want to do at the edge is build snowflakes, because you want every single environment to look the same. So you have, other qualities such as predictability, easy to troubleshoot, and you don't deviate from your standard models. And to do that, you have to start with the operating systems. So this is where I connect the dot between Kubernetes, the edge, and the operating system you're running underneath Kubernetes. So among those challenges we face, there is effectively deployment, data operations, security, software footprint. The form factor, usually it will be one node cluster, so you have to bear this in mind, and also the skills that you want to maintain at the edge location. If there is a problem, you don't want to send like expensive resources to fix what's happening, right? And so this becomes very important in terms of the underlying operating system, because ideally, it needs to be immutable so that you cannot change the runtime of your Kubernetes environment. And here, I'm not talking about the container runtime. I'm talking about the platform runtime, which is the operating system. So we need to make it more secure, make it immutable. So immutable just means that any change that you make live in the OS will be reverted at the next boot. It's not persistent, except some specific partition or user data directories, these kind of things. And there is quite a trend now. It's not only valid for Edge. I would say for any Kubernetes cluster, you should look at what we call container specialized operating systems. Here I'm specifying a couple of them. So Kairos is a bit specific. This is the topic of the talk today, of course. It's more than that, but typically you have K3S from Rancher. It's kind of dead nowadays. Then this one here is Bottle Rocket from AWS, from Amazon. The challenge with that one is it's only for worker nodes, not really for master. So unless you're running a AWS solution at the edge, there's no real use. So K3S, what is that is K3OS, which is the OS. K3S, this is the distribution you want to run at the edge, right? It's a lightweight version of Kubernetes, very easy to install, couple of binaries, can use, I think that's SQL Plus as the database to handle all the Kubernetes object, but you can also use etcd if you want a more production-ready environment. Here, this is Talos, which is a very opinionated operating system. This is a CNCF sort of, not project, but it's part of the CNCF landscape. Very opinionated in the sense that you deploy everything via command line and you deploy everything at once. The OS, the Kubernetes cluster, you cannot choose anything, right? It's a whole stack you want to deploy. Easy to do, but a lot of constraint. Flatcar, which is the next version of CoreOS back in the days, that has been kind of rebranded. Again, it's great, but it doesn't necessarily include native Kubernetes component. If you want to install Kubernetes, you will have to use traditional cloud inits and systemd configuration to install K3S and get your configuration up and running. And of course, Kairos, which I'm going to explain in a minute. And why to choose those container-specific OS? So first, immutability is one, which means predictability, more security, automated and orchestrated deployment. Usually, if this is a container-specific OS with Kubernetes in mind, you will find an integrated installer, which will make the installation a lot easier, the upgrade a lot easier, data operation. All that will also provide things like disk encryption traditionally, OS customization, and sometimes you can also have a declarative configuration model that leverage Kubernetes automation. So what that means is that most of the time you can deploy those Kubernetes clusters from a Kubernetes clusters, leveraging custom resource definition, which means that you make a Kubernetes cluster as an object, native object within Kubernetes, so that you can define the Kubernetes cluster you want to deploy as a YAML file. You're going to say, oh, I want this cluster with that many nodes using this operating system. So you can basically leverage Kubernetes itself as an automation engine. And it's like the Russian dolls, essentially. You have one set of things to maintain, one set of tools to maintain, and everything is running Kubernetes, right? Make things a lot easier. Okay, so now let's delve a bit deeper into the Kairos architecture. So at the very foundation, Kairos, the basic concept is to turn or to transform a container image into a full-fledged operating system. So it's a factory. On the left here, you just specify a Linux container image. So just a registry, like if it can be Alpine, can be your Ubuntu container image, can be a custom image that you've built. You put it as an input in the Kairos factory, as well as we're going to see later, a cloud init-like configuration file. And Kairos is going to produce ISO images that it can also serve on the network or for you in different format that we're going to see. And on top of that, so this is the core component, right? Kairos is going to turn the container image into a full-fledged OS and add a number of features on top, which is integration with K3s, so the ability to very easily deploy K3s distribution, add Edge VPN, which is a VPN overlay, which we're going to see can be very handy when you're at the edge to maintain your IP addresses in a stable format all the time, even though you may have like DHCP renew, these kind of things. So that's essentially, it's both things. This is why I said it's a edge solution, because we provide a container specialized OS, and it's highly customizable, so you don't have to rely on a specific distribution. As I said, if you have a container image, it can be turned into an immutable system. So immutable, again, it means like it's highly secured. Except the user partition, everything is immutable. And then we add on top of this the configuration part of Kairos, which will be a cloud config style configuration file, where the first part here is really basic native cloud init. So if you want to create new service, configure the network, systemd, all that, you can do it. Users, you can do it. And then we support extra key values that in the configuration file that will allow you to enable the different features of Kairos. So here, for example, I'm just deploying Kubernetes. So it's as easy as saying, okay, K3s enabled, and then the argument to install K3s. Very easy, and then the K3s token. That's a very quick example. With that configuration file, if you give this to Kairos and your container image, you will have an ISO you can install. And Kairos, we're going to see in a minute how you can also facilitate the install, all of that. So if we look a bit more closer to what the OS look like that is provisioned by Kairos, you will see an active passive partition as well as a recovery partition. And then this is the part that is immutable. And then for user data, of course, because you will have workloads running, you will have some persistency, of course. So you can also tweak what you want to be persistent within the the standard file system, or you can also configure extra directory where you want to put more things that you want to stay persistent across reboots. So now the big question is, how do you upgrade this, right? Because you cannot modify the system life. So how do you make any changes? There are a couple of options. The first one is, it's like your phone essentially, right? When you upgrade your iPhone, it's like a new image is going to be deployed overnight. You wake up the morning and then cross finger, your phone is updated and still working. It's kind of the same thing here, where you have active, passive, transition, partition. Upon upgrade, upgrade is just a new image of the container, or it can be a new configuration file. And then you give this to Kairos again, and you say, okay, I just want to upgrade, which is essentially reinstalling Kairos. It will install the new system in the transition partition, and then the transition is going to move to active. The active is going to move to passive, and the active image is replaced. In case of issue, then we still have our passive image that will be restored. So when I say if it's working, it's like if the system is not rebooting, then Kairos is smart enough to revert back to the old system. So a couple of things here why Kairos is also more secure in terms of booting and tampering. The init RAMFS, right, which is deployed by Kairos, is compiled statically, which means that even if you were to change the init RAMFS at runtime, you reboot the system, it reverts back to the original init RAMFS. So you cannot really tamper with the operating system, which is very useful at the edge location. So when you deploy Kairos, there are a couple of options to facilitate deployment at scale. So let's say the basic one, if you don't do anything special, you just boot the ISO image that has been produced by Kairos as an output, as an artifact. So again, remember we have the container image and we have the cloud init configuration. So here, what you do when you boot on Kairos, if you didn't specify anything like no configuration file, you will be presented the QR code. You take a picture of that QR code, add the configuration file that you want, and then here on a server that is connected to that location, like network is a requirement here, you just run the Kairos command line to say, okay, I want to register my node and deploy my configuration to that node, right? So as a parameter, we have the PNG for the QR code. You say, okay, which disk you want to install Kairos, and then the configuration file. And then that's it. The system continues to boot, and you have, depending on your configuration, you can have a Kubernetes master, or you can have a Kubernetes nodes, right? Or you maybe not Kubernetes install at all, right? Remember, Kubernetes is an option on top of it. A second option is a web UI configuration. So you can just enable the local HTTP server, and you can just copy paste the cloud config there. I mean, still okay, but not that ideal, right? Other nice feature is TPM disk encryption. So Kairos proposed like two modes, like offline and online encryption in terms of how we use the TPM. So the offline mode gives you the ability to store everything onto the TPM, so both the passphrase and the key pair. The online mode will export the passphrase onto a KMS server, for example. The offline mode just means that it encrypts the disk, but if someone was to steal the device, then obviously could eventually retrieve the encryption key in the TPM. So it's mostly for remote network access to the system and the disk being encrypted. We also released a white paper with Intel, who has been contributing. So over time, as I said, it's open source. We had contribution from Facebook, Intel. We've published a white paper with Intel called SENA, so Secure Edge Native Architecture. Because we are supporting now things like confidential computing with Intel chips, enclaves, all those kind of things to go one step further and give containers isolation and also encrypt memory for all of them, right? Not on the disk, only the disk, but also the memory, and making the CPU instruction much more isolated from each other. Now the part I like the most, and this is what I really enjoy by Kairos, is this. So far I've talked about, okay, if you want to configure a specific node, then you just use the cloud init, you configure it as a master, another one as a node. Here the idea is, how can I automatically deploy a cluster just by giving minimum information, such as, okay, I want 3 nodes on my control plane, and that's basically it. So Kairos has this nice feature to deploy a self-coordinated cluster by bootstrapping everything automatically. So it's essentially using the peer-to-peer library together with a distributed ledger like Bitcoin technology. So we don't have like a master and slave. Everything is shared between the nodes. They will kind of self-elect each other and bootstrap each other, so that in the end you have a multi-node control plane, so highly available control plane and highly available Kubernetes cluster, right? So I've got a config, and then I've got a configuration in the example in the demo, but yeah, I'm not sure if you're going to run the demo. And then you can serve that images within the network. So which is called Aurora boot. So Aurora boot is just another container you run. Same thing, you specify the Kairos image, the Kairos configuration. You just enable the feature of the self-bootstrap environment, the auto-deploy. And then what you're going to do, you're going to set in the configuration file, I want 3 nodes as control plane, and that's it. The rest will be, by default, worker nodes. Then you boot those devices from the network. Any device in that particular network will be turned in a Kubernetes member, right? So for example, here, let's say I've got the first 3 nodes will be configured as the control plane, and all the other ones, right? Any machine that boots on that network is going to be a member of the Kubernetes cluster as a worker node. So if you deploy 20 nodes, you will have a Kubernetes cluster in less than 15 minutes. So this one, it's really amazing. Okay, so, and the final thing that Kairos will provide is the ability to generate Kairos images from Kubernetes itself, right? So remember at the beginning I say you can use Kubernetes itself as an automation engine to deploy Kubernetes cluster by extending the Kubernetes API and making a Kubernetes cluster a first-class citizen, a Kubernetes object itself. So here, this is exactly what Kairos will be doing. So you can create, we provide, by using a Helm chart, you can add a new native object in Kubernetes that is called an OS artifact. Right, so in that OS artifact configuration, it's a YAML file. In that YAML file, you specify the path of the registry you want to use for the Kairos container image. You add the cloud config configuration in that file, and then you just do normal kubectl apply. Then the automation in Kubernetes will be triggered, and as a result of that, it will serve a Kubernetes service that you can access via HTTP, and what you will be served is an ISO image. So it helps you track all the Kubernetes clusters configuration. The number, can be maybe for different edge location, you will have different images. You can track everything within Kubernetes, right? So that's the, let's say, the final feature that Kairos will bring you is the ability to manage the whole lifecycle of the OS and your Kubernetes cluster by using Kubernetes itself. So do we do a demo or? Yeah, okay. Because I've been waiting a little bit. So for the demo, this is the demonstration of Aurora boot. Okay, so I need to, hopefully it's going to be big enough. I'm hoping to. Yeah, should be fine. So here the idea is I'm on a vCenter, so it's more like data center, like, at the edge, not in the cloud, where I have some physical or virtual machine. In that particular example, this will be virtual machine, and I want to deploy, I believe that's a 4 or 5 node cluster by using Aurora boot. So I'm going to, here you can see on the top right, I'm using govc, which is a command line that's use the VMware API to create virtual machine. So you're going to see like Kairos Aurora 1, 2, and I think a couple of other one as well. Let's go there. Okay, so if I just press the arrows, it's going to stop. So let's click there. So here, look on the left, you have 5 VM that have been deployed. And on the right here, you can see like Docker run. I'm specifying the aurora.yaml configuration, which again is a combination of the image registry path as well as the cloud config. And that's basically it. I'm just specifying the which image I want to run. And of course, this is the Aurora boot image, which is hosted on Quay. Then you can see here, Aurora boot is starting. Is putting my, so here I've shown an example where this is a custom image I've built. It's not like a Ubuntu image. It's an image where using a Docker file, you can add any type of software. This is what I've done here. So Aurora is going to download that image and then create, you can see at the bottom here, I've got an artifact that is produced, kairos.iso. So that ISO now is containing, so the ISO itself is a full-fledged OS version of my container image, plus it contains the Kairos configuration to deploy my Kubernetes cluster. So I'm serving a single image to deploy a 5-node cluster that includes 3 nodes for the control plane, right? So what happens next? So Aurora acts as a DHCP proxy. So it's not a DHCP server, which means you need the DHCP server on your layer 2 network, and which probably, will already be the case in an edge environment. Or what Aurora boot will do is just as a proxy to serve via Pixie those netboot this image. And as I said in the beginning, because it's going to be running the VPN overlay. What does that mean is every node will communicate between each other over an overlay IP address, which is a stable IP address. So even if you have an issue within your edge environment and the environment may die for a couple of days, you come back, typically new IP address, which means your etcd cluster is dead, right? Your Kubernetes cluster it's over. Here, you won't have any issue because every communication is based on that particular IP, overlaid IP. Okay, so where's my mouse? So now what's going to happen is in the video there, you can see every VM as part of the network that the Kairos Aurora boot is serving is booting via the network and downloading the image. So I'm going to go a bit further away. So it's going to happen for all my 5 VMs here. If we accelerate a little bit, let's go to the end. So Kairos is getting installed. You can see like transient from active. The image is copied to the active partition. And now it's going to be booting. And where the magic happens is that it's also installing the Kubernetes cluster. And here, just to show you the result at the end, yeah, you can see the system has booted into Kairos here with the Kairos logo. So normally at this stage, all the VM they have booted. We have the distributed process that has self-bootstrap the cluster. And if I just connect to my cluster, I should see a highly available control plane. So by default, Kairos is using kubevip, right? So we don't need any hardware load balancer. You will have a virtual IP for your control plane by default. So it's really like, a full production-ready solution where you don't have to install anything, even for a highly available Kubernetes cluster. So here I just have the kubectl file that you can find just by using Kairos command. Like Kairos get kubectl will give you the kubectl file for that particular cluster. Now I'm just going to connect to that particular kubectl file, and I think I'm just going to do like kubectl get to see get pods to see everything. I didn't do it live because it takes probably 20 minutes to deploy everything. I'm using K9s. If you don't know that tool, I really recommend it because it's really easy to use for monitoring your Kubernetes cluster. And here you can see just here like all the pods that have been deployed. So you can see kubevip has been deployed, the local path provisioner to make your hard drive like available for storage and PVC in Kubernetes. You can see traffic has been installed as well. And you also have the metric server that is installed if you want to do any sort of auto-scaling, HPA, VPA, this kind of thing. This is quite useful. Actually, it's a requirement. And in terms of number of nodes, if I just go there, it's really at the end. Completed there. Okay. I want to see the number of nodes. It's been there. Yeah. Here you go. There you go. So you can see effectively that now we have a highly available Kubernetes cluster with 3 control plane node, etcd, and we have 2 worker. All of that deployed from a single container. So it's quite useful. At the same time, as I said, it can be used for edge, but to be honest, I'm using for all my Kubernetes labs and things like that because it's just one container to spin up, and then in 10 minutes you have a full-fledged cluster. So just to finish now, where is my mouse? Here you go. Okay, key takeaways for today. An immutable OS is very important for the edge, but also I would extend this to any Kubernetes production installation. You should start to think about what is the best OS for your for your clusters, because immutability is really key because all the security features, etc. Kairos can build a full-fledged OS from a container image thanks to the Kairos factory. It simplifies Kubernetes and the underlying OS lifecycle management because now everything is tied together. Whether you want to upgrade your OS or Kubernetes, it's a single process. Kairos has many benefits, including the peer-to-peer gossip network, the VPN overlay, the self-coordinated deployment of HA cluster, the standardization with the cloud init configuration, and bundles. So bundles is just a way to install software on top of your image, right? So you have to think about this way. So we have the container image, which gives you the golden image for your cluster, for Kairos. And if you want to install anything on that, we have bundles. So bundles is just execution scripts that are bundles as extra containers. So it's like you have the basic container image for your Kairos environment, and then you can execute script from other containers where you specify also the container image registry to add additional software in Kairos, right? So you have the golden image. If you don't want to put everything in that golden image, you can run bundles on top. That's another ability of Kairos. And the last, nice thing about Kairos is that it doesn't limit you. It's not opinionated in terms of the operating system you want to deploy at the edge. Now, the difference, of course, I'm working for SpectroCloud, so here I'm just hooking how we use Kairos. So we have a edge offering, which is quite popular. Actually, if you went to KubeCon last year, we have a customer talking about how they were using drones, using Kairos to harvest fruits in their fields in the US, which was quite fun, actually. So Palette, which is the SpectroCloud solution, leverage Kairos, but with extra features such as a central management and the ability to create repeatable and declarative cluster profiles you can deploy in many different, edge location. We also have like a hardened operating system with all the CIS benchmark recommendation, easy upgrades, and extra developer experience when you can deploy application within those clusters. Okay, I think that's done for today. So if you want to take a look, again, it's open source, try it, because we need feedback from people. As I said, we had contribution Facebook, Intel, other big companies, SUSE. We have office hours if you're curious every week. We have a community Slack. It's part of SpectroCloud, but it's the SpectroCloud community Slack. We have Matrix if you prefer Matrix. And just check out the Kairos repo. You can very easily install it. And as part of our monthly release, we also provide directly those ISO images if you want to skip and just try like Alpine, Ubuntu, or OpenSUSE version and try to use Kubernetes with this. And we have a release with and without K3S, so you can test this as well. And that's it for me for today. Any question? Thank you.
I've got a question. So as you were speaking about it, and very cool stuff, by the way.
Thank you.
How does it this approach compare to like the unikernel approach?
I would say it's kind of similar in the sense that it's very minimal. The Kairos image won't be necessarily super slim compared to other distribution. So I know that there is like unikernel. There is also what is the Nix approach as well to manage everything declaratively. But Kairos is really different in the sense that it's meant for Kubernetes in the end, right? By giving also folders and partitions that will be persistent, right? In terms of the kernel as well, Kairos will be opinionated, so you can't really choose. I mean, of course, you can create your own container in and upload this into your registry, but of course the kernel will be depending on your local machine where you're deploying Kairos from, where you're creating the Kairos image, right? So here, it's a bit different, but I guess some of the steps will be similar in terms of the lifecycle management. So it's much more like much closer to CoreOS and this type of approach that pure uni and unikernel and minimalist systems.
Got it. And I'm not sure I understood correctly, but the wrapping OS around the container, you said there are multiple flavors. You can pick whether it's like Ubuntu based or...
Yeah, so when we, as part of our release cycle, when we release a new version of Kairos, we also, as part of the artifact, we provide ISO from the most, let's say, used operating system. So you will find OpenSUSE, Alpine, Ubuntu, a couple of others. But if you want to use something else, maybe like a custom OS or Fedora or something like that, then you build your ISO yourself using one of the available process. The only thing you need is a container registry. So it can be anything. If you do a Docker run whatever container image, and you install things manually in that image, or you use Dockerfile, and then you commit the changes to your registry, and you feed this to Kairos, your end operating system will be based on that particular OS you had in the container, right? What you're running in the container image. So, of course, out of the box, we support the ISO we released, but we will also help you if you have any issue with a particular distribution and a custom image. The team will also help people with that.
Got it. And one more quick one. So I'm wondering, as you were talking about, CoreOS, and they used to have this active passive partition, and then they got bought out and things changed. Is it possible to use the component of Kairos to just manage swapping the active passive partition without going like the whole way, or is it always a package?
I would say it's embedded into the code logic.
Right. Okay.
So you could take a look at the code and implement some of the logic to do that, because as I said, it's fully open source. But yeah, everything is in the repo. And now it's in terms of the package, I'm not sure how it's organized. If this is like a library, could be reused easily. But from what I've seen so far, it's quite organized. So you could potentially import this in your own code, but not as part of a binary or something you can easily integrate with other operating system, because Kairos is it's really building a new OS, with the partitioning and the scratch partition, the squish FS, all of that.